You're on.
All right, thank you.
I just opened my book and the first line says, goal to understand salvation history.
That's right.
That's from way back there.
Yeah.
We're still working on it.
We're still working on it. That's exactly right, Terry Jo. All right, everybody, how y'all doing?
Good. We're
Good.
all right.
Good to see you. Okay, we're going to be starting chapter 7 of Hebrews today. Okay, we just we had finished up with Melchizedek. We're going to get more into Melchizedek. Nothing makes me get all lathered up like Melchizedek. So the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Holy God, we give you thanks and praise for this day, for this time to gather. We ask, O Lord, that you would instill wisdom in our hearts and minds through the Holy Scripture, and we ask, O Lord, that we might be transformed by this so that we might recognize your grace in our presence. And we ask, O Lord, all this in your name, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. All right, Katie Murphy, I am sorry to tell you this, but I have a feeling that a few people might straggle in here. So get your game face on of disapproval, okay?
Yes.
All right.
Let's give them the stink eye.
Yeah, that's right. So
As long as their phones don't go off.
as long as your phones don't go off, so make sure your phones don't go off.
We give you the stink eye.
Or yes, you will get the stink eye. So, all right. So we're gonna be the end of chapter 6 and really the chapter 7 really kind of transforms where we're going with the letter to the Hebrews. So the letter to the Hebrews was giving us great assurance in chapter 6, and we were seeing all of these things that are kind of lead up to chapter 7. So one of the things that we want to see is, why is Jesus Christ necessary, given that he doesn't come at the beginning of salvation history on one hand. He seems to come in the middle of salvation history, and this becomes something that both the writer of the letter to the Hebrews is trying to deal with, and especially St. Paul is trying to deal with this, and then the gospel writers in their own right are also trying to deal with the question of, why does Jesus come in the middle of salvation history, not at the beginning of salvation history? Or why?
Because God sent all the prophets and the other people, and the people wouldn't listen to him.
Okay, right. So
he had no other choice.
So there is a way in which Jesus has been, God has been speaking to his people through the prophets, through law, through all of these other means, and yet they've been somewhat ineffectual, right? And we're going to deal with that ineffectualness in our discussion today. And yet, where this is going to lead is kind of a reflection of the whole kind of telling of salvation history, which is going to start coming in the next few chapters. He's really going to give us a sense of how all of these different people kind of received the blessing of from God that was given originally with Abraham. Now, one of the interesting things, and we talked about this before, that is both in Paul, especially in his letter to the Romans, and also the letter to the Hebrews, and in its own way in the Gospels, but slightly tweaked, and that is that both Paul and the letter to the writer, the writer to the letter of the Hebrews, the author of this book, are very clear that they want to get behind the giving of the law, right? That there's something that Jesus is doing that precedes the giving of the law, right? In other words, what is, and this is the aha moment when you understand it. So the high point of the high point or the beginning of salvation history is not the giving of the law, right? This is really important for people to understand. That's not where God's relationship to God's people begins, right? So what is it? Well, we were reading Genesis, what?
Creation.
Okay, so there's creation, that's yes, but what did you just say? Abraham, right. So there's a promise given, right? And the law given on Mount Sinai is trying to get people to respond better to the promise given to Abraham already, right? So the law isn't a beginning in and of itself. The law is pointing back to this promise given to Abraham, right? And that's why Paul, and that's why the author of this letter are pointing us back to before the law, right? And in fact, in the Gospels, Jesus is always saying to them, why do you keep reading the story beginning with the law, right? Why would you start there, right? The story's already been going on for quite a while. The promise has already existed for a while. Why do you continually start the story in the place where the story doesn't begin, right? That's kind of his argument with the Pharisees, right?
But with this promise, it leaves out the Gentiles.
Right. Okay. So right. And what is Jesus in some ways doing that none of the law or the prophets before did? What is Jesus
giving everybody?
Yes, he is the doorway to everybody receiving the promise, right? And this is part of why the author to the Hebrews and also Paul want to get behind the law, because the law really seals off God's people from everybody else, right? And it makes it hard for there to be kind of a way in which to communicate the promise given to Abraham to everybody without somebody like Jesus coming in, right? Now, what is Jesus?
But the law, it gives you structure for...
Right. So what does Jesus say?
For communities and anybody.
That's right. So you're spot on, Ron. So what does Jesus say when the Pharisees think that he's getting rid of the law?
Fulfill.
I'm not getting rid of one iota of the law. I am fulfilling the law, right? And the prophets, right? But in that fulfillment, I'm also opening the door so that everybody can share in that structure that helps form individuals and societies.
But all the prophets before that were also going past Jesus, telling what Jesus is going to do in the future as well.
Right.
So
right.
They could hear it from there that something's going to happen that may include some more people.
Right. But the problem was, what were the Pharisees very anxious about? What were the Pharisees?
Their own power.
Well, they were very anxious about their own power, but I think that
Everybody's sinning.
Everybody's sinning, and what they were especially interested in was the purity aspects of the law.
Were they really?
Right, yeah. So here's what I would say. Here's what I would say. They are, right? Because the problem, of course, is this, and this is the problem that Jesus noted. It's why Jesus, when they say, should you pay taxes to Caesar or not, what's his response?
Sure. Yeah. On the coin. Yeah.
Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, give unto God what is God's. Which is, what he was saying is, okay, it would be fine and dandy if we could somehow create a society in which Jews never had to deal with anybody outside of their self-contained reality of Israel. But he said...
Which is not reality.
Which is not reality, right? Because ever since the law was given with them wandering through other people's lands, right? And so already baked into the law is the fact that you have to deal with other people.
And taking over their land.
Right,
as well.
right. But here's the thing. There's never been a time when you didn't have to deal with somebody not like you, right? And guess what? Even after Jesus comes, and this is part of the New Testament, what does Paul keep struggling with in 1 Corinthians? What's the big issue?
Circumcision?
Well, no, circumcision is Galatians, but Galatians also has this issue.
Well, he's talking about resurrection.
It's
1
about
Corinthians
table fellowship.
15.
Here's the thing. It's about table fellowship.
Who eats with them?
Why are you hung up on not eating with people not like you?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Right? Like, this is the issue. And guess what? Here's the thing. Not only did Jews have a problem with not eating with people like them, but Greeks had a problem with it, and Romans had a problem with it, and just about everybody had a problem with it, not just Jewish people, right? It's just that
They're all scared.
yes, they're all scared of what it might mean if you eat with somebody who's different with you. Now, the problem, of course, is this. Katie, how many ways can we cut difference up? Right? Like, I mean, if you get down to it, you can always slice the cake of difference even thinner, right?
Yeah.
Right? So there's, and this is part of what Paul was saying was, how many ways are you going to cut the cake until you're the only one who you can eat dinner with,
Yeah.
right?
It was so funny, Sarah was saying that she works for the seminary in Swanee. She said, some of these people have only been Episcopalians for 15 minutes. And I looked at her and I thought, well, you were a Methodist, so, you know.
Right. Okay, so now here's the thing. Part of what the law says is there's got to be structures, there's got to be rules, there's got to be ways of engagement and stuff like, and these are good things. How do we treat other people, right? But the problem is we're always bombarded with exceptions. Like you could set up the best rules of government ever, and day one you're going to have an exception that asks you to think outside the box, right? Why do you think we have a Supreme Court? Because the moment after, well, okay, come on now, Katie, right? Okay, but the moment after they wrote the laws, what did they figure out?
Have to interpret.
You have to interpret them, right? And it's hard to interpret them. And one of the ways that Jesus interpreted the law, and it's brilliant, is that instead of just telling people what he thought was right or wrong, what he did was he enacted what was right or wrong, and then he asked people to see where God's grace was present in what he enacted, right? So he would eat with Pharisees, but then the next day he'd eat with what? Sinners or Gentiles or women or whomever, right? And then he would say, okay, did you see what I did?
Even Samaritans.
Why might God's grace be manifest in what I did? Right? Because other people have interpreted it differently, right? So let's ask ourselves, where was God's grace available to us? And so oftentimes what happens when he's eating is somebody is healed of something, right? Right? A withered leg or blindness or a demon or whatever, and he'll say, well, right, you saw me interpret the law by what I did. What was the outcome of what I did? Oh, the outcome was somebody was healed. Oh, well, when somebody's healed, what is that a sign of? Well, we would say that's a sign of God's grace, right? So, that's an interpretation of the law based on his enacting the interpretation and then getting people to reflect on where God's grace was operative in what he did, right? So that, this is important, so that his community of followers would have, in some ways, a way of reflecting on what was right or wrong, what was good or bad, and it oftentimes was, where was the fruit of what we did, right? Was there grace there or was there not grace there? Okay, now Katie, and then
The important thing about where we start salvation history is if you start at Genesis, you start with a loving, creative God.
that's right.
If you start with the law, you don't.
You start with
a very
judgment.
different God.
Right,
Exactly.
you start with judgment. And this is the really important thing, is that the law is given Because the people are having a hard time staying in relationship to God, right? So the law is given as a corrective measure for something that they're having trouble enacting, right? And so what the writer to the Hebrews is doing is saying, the promise is always there. God's grace and promise and faithfulness is always there. The problem is our capacity to stay in relationship and enact the promise, right? Because what he says is this: if you enact the promise, if you stay faithful to what God is faithful in doing, you'll reap these great benefits, right? Why wouldn't you want to have great benefits? Because the promises lead to this, right? Now the problem is most of us can't see past tomorrow, right? And the promises ask you to have long-term vision, right? When you get insurance, what are you saying? Well, I don't know what tomorrow is going to be like, and I don't know what next month is going to be like, but I do know something bad might happen to me. It's planning for the future, right? And part of what Paul and part of what our writer is talking about is, the world's a crazy place. And it's going to try and seduce you to thinking that your problems today are bigger and more powerful than God's promises. Right? And you will be seduced into believing that your problems today are bigger than God's promises, which will extend into the future. And let me tell you, well, I've driven that bus many times. My problems are bigger than God's promises. Okay, Tricia, and then Ron. Okay.
Mankind basically has an insecure nature, period. That's where the whole thing goes. They're always looking for something else that's better inside there is not, it's not an insecure.
Right. So
they're in their heart, people are not insecure.
Right, so, but that's the beginning of the story. God says you can have all this great stuff, just don't wander off over there and eat that thing over there because it's not good for you, right? And then the world, i.e. the devil, in the form of a serpent, comes and says, have I got a deal for you? Have I got a deal for you? I've got a better deal than God's deal, right? And look, the food, the fruit looks good, it tastes good, it smells good, and it comes with wisdom. What could be better than this, right?
Well, it's different. We don't know about it.
Right. But now the problem is insecurity isn't just about, I'm worried that Ed's going to kill me tonight. It's more like, well, what don't I know?
What might be better?
Right. So St. Augustine says in his Confessions, our hearts are restless until they rest in you, O Lord. Right? Okay. So now what we have here is the author getting us behind the law, because the law is meant as a corrective to people who are finding it hard to stay in communion with the promise that God has given them. Right? So God says to Abraham, you're going to have all this stuff. But even Abraham has a hard time receiving the promise. Well, God, show me something more, right? Well, it sounds an awful lot like the people around Jesus, right? Well, Jesus, you only fed 5,000 of us. I'd like to see you feed 10,000 of us, right? When are you feeding us again, Jesus? Right? Okay. So Ron, what was your question going to be?
One question, I was just going to say, you just talking about enacting the faith.
Yeah.
You got to believe
Yeah.
his promise.
Right.
We don't. The majority
Right.
does not believe it's a
What,
promise.
what gives you evidence of that?
Well, we come here regularly and listen to the promises, but we don't go out.
Well, so sometimes when you.
I try to, I
Right,
do.
but even you know, it's hard to enact the promises in my life because I get seduced sometimes by seeing other things, right? And that what the phrases that Jesus uses is hard-hearted or stiff-necked, right? Because that's what Exodus really gives.
Well, we know all things work together
Yeah.
for the good. as long
All right.
as we love God.
TJ,
Yes.
read 7:1 through 7:3.
This Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, met Abraham as he was returning from defeating the kings and blessed him. And to him Abraham apportioned 1/10 of everything. His name in the first place means King of Righteousness. Next, he is also King of Salem, that is, King of Peace, without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever.
All right, so this tells us, okay, this gives us kind of the backstory of King Melchizedek, and King Melchizedek is not just a king, he's also a priest, right? So he's king of righteousness, right? And he is the priest of the Most High God, and he met Abraham as he was returning from defeating the kings, and he blessed Abraham, right? And to him, Abraham apportioned 1/10 of everything,
Just
right?
like we're supposed to do.
Right. Okay, so this is where the tithe comes from, right? Now, we're going to find out something really interesting about this tithe, because what the author is going to say is, okay, well, you know, in Judaism, we give 1/10 of everything we make, of our offerings, to the Levitical priesthood, right? And he's going to say something very interesting about that. So we need to remember, okay, so this tithe to the priesthood predates what was given to the Levitical priesthood, because this practice began with Abraham giving 1/10 to Melchizedek, right? Okay, now remember, where is Melchizedek the king of? What's he the king of? Salem. What's Salem? Jerusalem. And it's the city of peace. So he's the king of righteousness, right? Right? And he's the king of the city of Salem, i.e. Jerusalem, but he's the king of peace and he's the king of righteousness. Now that word milk is king is king in both Judaism or Hebrew and Aramaic and also Arabic. It's the Western root for king, the Western Semitic root for king. You hear it a lot. You'll hear a lot of people from Arabic-speaking countries having some form of the word milk in their name. Okay, so milk is king. Sedek is righteousness. Salem is peace. Right? That sounds an awful lot like who? Jesus. Right? Right. Who becomes the great high priest in Jerusalem? Jesus. Right? Who is the king of righteousness? Jesus. Right? Okay, so you can see, not only is he picking up this character, not only is the author picking up this character because of who he is in relation to Abraham, but because this guy, who is a king and a priest, like Jesus, is a king of righteousness and a king of peace, right? So, his name sounds an awful lot like Jesus' titles, okay? All right, we don't know who Melchizedek's mother and father is. We don't get any genealogy of him, and we have no record of him dying. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have a genealogy or that he didn't die, but the authors pick this up. There's no record of where he comes from or where he dies. Okay, so now he says Abraham apportions 1/10 of everything. That's a tithe. And his name in the first place means king of righteousness. Next, he is also king of Salem. That's what we're talking about. That is king of peace. Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God. See, but resembling the Son of God, right? He remains a priest forever. What is Jesus from the beginning of time? He's a priest forever, right? Okay, so remember how Hebrews actually begins. Remember, he gives us in the beginning, right? This is who Jesus was, right? Right, exactly, long ago. All right, so now we have this, and he's kind of giving us the image of Jesus kind of appearing as kind of Melchizedek, okay?
What's that term they use for that, Robert? I can't remember.
What?
For the pre-incarnate Christ.
Oh, well, the Word. That's what it's used a lot as the Word.
But isn't there a term for that? I just can't remember.
Well, I would call it in John it's called the Word or the Logos. I think that's probably the Greek word that you're looking for, the Logos, because remember.
It's like an apocryphal, or that's not it, but it's.
Well, the Word is that which creates and patterns everything. So God's creative force comes in and through Jesus Christ. Everything takes the pattern, you might say, of Jesus or the Word. Okay, so now, Katie, will you read 7:4 through 7:10?
See how great he is. Even Abraham the patriarch gave him 1/10 of his spoils. And those descendants of Levi who received the priestly office have a commandment in the law to collect tithes from the people, that is, from their kindred. Though these also are descendants from Abraham. But this man who
Okay, so what he's saying is the Levites are descendants of Abraham, all right? But these also are descendants of Abraham. So what, in his way of thinking, even though people are giving this 1/10 to the Levites, to the people from the tribe of Levi, the tribe of Levi is coming out of Abraham, right? Because all of the tribes of Israel come out of Abraham, okay? And what he's going to say is, and this is really important, Melchizedek gave a blessing to Abraham, which in many ways is showing that Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. But the Levitical priesthood comes out of Abraham so that they are lesser or under Abraham, all right? So just kind of remember that, because this is important, because he's trying to show us what's greater and what's lesser, all right? So you kind of have to get in his mindset. For him, things that come later are lesser than things that come earlier, right? And that is how most of the ancient world thought about things. New things, not good. Old things, really good, okay? Things that are eternal and go all the way back to the beginning of time, great, okay? So, and let me just say this. This was not just a Jewish idea. This was a Greek and Roman idea as well. So the Greeks were always lamenting what had been lost. Remember when the great heroes of the past did great and valiant things, but look at us, we're a mess, right? And even when you read the Aeneid, which is Virgil's great work, Roman Latin work, which, let me say this, he was paid by Caesar Augustus to write the Aeneid. It's very important, right? What happens is that Aeneas goes down into the underworld to see the great lineage of Rome. Why is Rome great? not because of what it's doing in the present, but because of the lineage that it has in the past, right? So it's very important. We as Americans think about ourselves as being great in many ways because of what we're doing right now, or what our future is going to be. But even 2 generations ago, most people would have said, the only reason you're great is because what came before you, right? But we live in the now world, right? Where things are great because I did it today, right? But most people in history have thought things are great because of how you were tied to something that came before you, right?
I know why I got a C in Latin.
Why?
Well, you just,
Yeah.
you explained something that I
Yeah.
didn't pick up,
Yeah.
many years ago.
Well, and let me just say this.
I gotta see in that.
Yeah, you got to see.
I got an A.
You got an A, right?
That's
Yeah.
what all those talking about females.
Okay, now I will say this. A lot of these themes then that the author to the Hebrews is writing to are resonating with the Greek and Roman minded people who are also in these communities and reading this stuff, right? So he's not using arguments that are so specific only to Jews that Greeks and Romans couldn't understand them, right? Everybody in the ancient world thought they were important based on who their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and so on and so forth were. So when Jesus gets a genealogy, it's not like the Romans are going, I don't understand this. Because in their great story, Aeneas goes to the underworld to see the great lineage of the Romans, right? And so this is really important to people, right? Well, the author of the Hebrews, it's important to him. Okay, so keep reading, Katie.
But this man, who does not belong to their ancestry, collected tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had received the promises. It is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. In the one case, tithes are received by those who are mortal. In the other, by one of whom it is testified and he lives. For one might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him.
Okay, so the Levites are paying tithes to whom? They're paying tithes to Melchizedek. Why? Because they come out of the loins of Abraham. Thus, they were in the loins of Abraham while Abraham was paying the tithe to Melchizedek. So he says it's obvious that Melchizedek is greater than this priesthood, the priesthood of the Levites. Now, it's important to remember, there's 2 priesthoods. There's the general Levitical priesthood, which is kind of, you might think of this as the diaconate, okay? And then you have the Aaronic priesthood, right? But the Aaronic priesthood it is within the Levitical priesthood, right? These are all sons of Levi. It's just that one group that is sons of Aaron, who's in the tribe of Levi. Okay? Right. So now, the Levitical priesthood, which he traces back to Abraham, do have a lineage. And that lineage begins in Abraham. And even Abraham has a lineage, but Abraham is mortal. What happens to Abraham? Eventually what happens to Abraham? He dies, right? Right? And we're told who his father is. He has beginning, he has end, and even the Levitical priesthood, they have a beginning, right? And they have an end. And he's going to tell us that. Thus, their priesthood is imperfect. Right? What would you like? Would you like a perfect, divine priest? Or would you like a broken, mortal priest? I hope you say broken, mortal priest, because that's what I am. Okay? All right. No, of course, the answer is you want somebody like Melchizedek, i.e., you want Jesus. Right? That's where this is all going to. remember, don't get too concerned about the eye candy of Melchizedek. It's important.
About the what?
The eye candy of Melchizedek, okay, which is, there's a lot of talk about Melchizedek and how great Melchizedek, and he was all that. But remember, the story ain't about Melchizedek, the story's about Jesus. Okay, right? So there's a lot of eye candy about Melchizedek, all right? But you always have to remember, this is really about Jesus, okay? So just remember that Melchizedek is only here to show us that Jesus was at work before the law, okay? Right? That's the important thing, is that there was a priesthood operative with the house of Abraham before the law. And that is Melchizedek, king of righteousness, king of Salem, i.e. king of righteousness and king of peace, i.e. in one way or another, Jesus. All right, Tricia.
I've always been told, if wishes were horses, beggars would ride. Why?
Say that again?
If wishes were horses, beggars would ride.
Yeah, well, because...
Why? That's what this is all about, say,
Yeah.
whatever happens.
So what he's just saying is, like, you know, in many ways,
We never can be what we wanna be.
well, I say that all the time. You know, like, I was saying this last night. You know, I was saying, you know, for one day, I'd like to have the skills of Ben Davis. I'd like to be able to fix things. I'd like to be able to do woodworking. And you know what my family said? Yeah, that would be great for one day if you could fix everything in the house and we didn't have to call Joe McConnell. Right? Right, okay. So, yeah, I want things that I don't have already. Right? That's human nature. Right? Think of some skill or gift that you would want, right? Some way in the world. Now, I'm going to tell you this. This is also part of the issue that Paul has with the Corinthians. The Corinthians all want somebody else's spiritual gift. Well, you know, Ed talks in tongues. Well, Ron's a prophet. Well, you know, she preaches, Judith preaches, or Lynn is great at management of the funds, whatever. Right? And part of the problem of the Corinthians is they all want the spiritual gifts that somebody else has. Right? They're not content with what God actually gave them.
That basic insecurity, well, why?
Why? Because we turn away from God. Our security is in God, not in the things of the world. Okay, Katie, keep reading. Oh no, you finished, right?
Yeah.
All right,
She fell
so...
to the loins.
So Sherry, why don't you pick up, read 11 through 14.
Now, if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for the people received the law under this priesthood, what further need would there have been to speak of another priest arising according to the order of Melchizedek, rather than one according to the order of Aaron?
All right, did you hear that? According to remember what I said?
Yeah.
Aaron's priesthood is in the priesthood of Levi. And whose brother is Aaron? Moses, right? So both Moses and Aaron are in the house of Levi, okay? Okay, keep reading.
For when there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law as well. Now the one of whom these things are spoken belonged to another tribe, from which no one has ever served at the altar. For it is evident that our Lord was descended from Judah, and in connection with that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests.
Something I always wondered.
All right, right, exactly. So this is great. So remember this, I want you to hear this. So what is one of the accusations that the Pharisees and the scribes and the high priests and the Sadducees level against Jesus? What do they keep saying? Okay, but how do they put it? What do they keep saying to Jesus? Nothing good has ever come from Nazareth, right? Because we know what the tribe is up there, and that's not a tribe of priests and prophets, right? We can trace your lineage, so to speak, back. We know who Joseph is, right? Okay, but the problem is that they really don't know where he's from. Where is Jesus born again? Bethlehem. His family's actually from the house of Judah and the house of David, right? And so what we have here is a case of mistaken identity, right? Their accusation against Jesus is, you're a nobody from Nowheresville.
And illegitimate.
And illegitimate, right? But we know from the beginning of the readings of the Gospels that indeed Jesus wasn't who they thought he was, both in his genealogy, but also in who he actually was, right? Now, what's interesting here is this, is that he says, rather than one according to the order of Aaron, right? For where there is a change in the priesthood, there is necessarily a change in the law. Now that's hard to comprehend, but what he's really saying is when the law came into effect, right, the law brought with it a new priesthood, right? And that priesthood in some ways is blinding us to the effect that before there was the law, there was a different priesthood, which was the priesthood of Melchizedek, rather than the priesthood of Aaron and Levi. All right, question. Because this is really complicated stuff, because it's asking you to think in a different logical way than we would think, okay?
Why do you think this is important to us?
Why is this important to us?
Well, I mean, I don't
Okay,
really understand the relevance of.
well, because what we've got here is that he's writing to Jews trying to figure out if they should just follow the law, right? Or if they should follow Jesus. What has priority over what, right? Does the law and its demands on us have priority over following Jesus, right? And what the author's trying to say is, well, if we understand it, obviously Jesus takes precedence over the law and the sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem.
Don't look back.
Yeah, don't look back, you'll turn into a pillar of salt. All right. So the argument being made here is that actually what Jesus is representing comes prior or before the law. And actually the law is there only because people couldn't abide by the promise, right? And so when Jesus says, I came to fulfill the law and the prophets, what he's actually saying, and this is really important, is I came to fulfill the promise given to Abraham. I didn't come to fulfill just the law, because if you fulfilled the law and the prophets, what you would be doing is fulfilling the promises that God gave to Abraham. Okay?
Would Jews at this time that he's writing to be all up on who Melchizedek
Oh,
was
of course.
and the meaning
Right.
of it?
Right, because and this is why he keeps referencing Old Testament stuff. Now remember, how did the Jewish people pray? What did they use to pray?
Psalms.
The Psalms, right? And they used the Psalms. Well, where does this line where is it? At what we're going to read here. For it is attested of him, you are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Where does that come from? Does anybody know?
We first saw it in Genesis.
Okay, so the first reference to Melchizedek comes from Genesis when he starts, and we just read about that, right? But Melchizedek is attested to in the Psalm 110, verse 4, right? Okay, so let me
Tell us
read.
anything about it. I mean, it seems to me like he's just Jesus earlier or something.
Okay, well, the point of what was going to be said is this. is that Melchizedek actually has his origin in God, not in any humanity, right? And what does Jesus have his origin in? God, right, okay, and that's, the point is that they're both priests who are connected directly to God, right? So,
So everybody's seeking justification,
well,
and maybe they all call it God, then.
all right, so now here,
Where is he in Genesis?
we'll get to that in just a second. Here's Psalm 110. Here's Psalm 110, verse 4. The Lord has sworn, and he will not recant. The Lord has sworn, and he will not recant. I.e., the promise he gave to Abraham is still valid. It has not been annulled, okay? That's, the Lord has sworn, and he will not recant. And then you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, right? That's in Psalm 10, verse 4, okay? And,
All right, wait a minute, when he says you, who is you?
well, that's a great question. Who is you? Ultimately, Jesus will say, I am the you of Psalm 110. Right. What does he do all the time? What is he doing all the time with the Psalms? He's reading the Psalms through himself. Right? What is he doing on the cross? He's reading the Psalms through himself. Right? So, what I would say, and this is what the church has often said, is the you in Psalm 110 is Jesus. Right.
Can you look at Genesis where it is?
Yeah.
Close to where we quit reading.
All right. So,
What happened to Aaron?
all right. This is fantastic. What happened to Aaron? Well, eventually Aaron died. But remember, who isn't allowed into the promised land? Moses. Why isn't Moses allowed into the promised land? What?
Disobeyed.
What?
He disobeyed God.
But who really disobeyed God?
Aaron.
His brother really disobeyed
He
God.
built the calf.
Right? He's not allowed in because the people disobeyed God. And who were the people listening to when they disobeyed God?
Aaron.
They were listening to their priest,
Yeah.
Aaron. Actually, they demanded that their priest make the golden calf. And so the priest says, well, they were going to kill me. Right? So often, what I often say is Moses is atoning for the sins of the whole people, most especially his brother Aaron, by not getting it. But here's the thing. He sees the promised land, right? He overlooks the promised land. And by that time, if I were Moses, I'd be so doggone tired of these people. I'd be like, kill me now, right? Right, kill me now. All right, yes, Henry.
I'm just beginning to wonder, because in the book of Exodus, prior to the installation of Aaron as priest, there are mentioned priests among the children of Israel migrating out. And so, was there some kind of a Melchizedekian priesthood that came down through, Abraham, and perhaps a shadow priesthood of some kind going through the ages until?
I mean, it's quite possible, but it's sometimes you don't have all the answers given to you. I think so.
Another question, or part of that, would be that in Abraham's time, the fear of the Lord seemed to have been relatively popular among people all the way around in the Middle East.
Well,
not everybody, but there's large number of them. Melchizedek may have been their high priest, and he's kind of like passing along an apostolic succession through Abraham.
All right, now hold on here. So,
Go to Genesis.
yeah.
I'm referring to keep things that I've seen and things that I've picked up and all that.
Okay, I'm trying to find it here.
I'm sorry to ask you for that. Who has Google?
It's like,
It was after they left Sodom and Gomorrah.
yes.
23:16.
I've got it. Okay, here we go. 14:17 through 18, okay? I'll read this to you. After his return from the defeat of Kedor Laomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom who went out to meet him at the valley of Shava, that is the king's valley. And King Melchizedek of Salem brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. He blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. Okay, so this is what's fascinating. We see this.
It's told at the beginning,
Okay.
back in the beginning of the
So,
story.
once again, so he is an intermediary who is blessing Abram / Abraham, and he blesses him by having a meal with bread and wine in honor of Abraham, now as a sign of Abraham not only being blessed by Melchizedek, but by Abraham being blessed by God. What does that sound like?
Sound like Jesus.
Sounds like Jesus, right? And that's why, like I say, when you read Melchizedek, oh, king of peace, king of righteousness, he is the priest of Abraham, but he's also mediating the covenant through bread and wine.
Yeah.
Who mediates our covenant through bread and wine? Jesus does, right? Okay, I think this is really interesting because the sacrifices that we have in Jesus, we have this really interesting sacrifice that takes table and altar and pushes them together, right? I've said this time and time again. The Eucharistic table is not a Eucharistic table unless it's an altar. And the Eucharistic altar is not an altar unless it's a table for fellowship, right? It's got to be both. You can't have one or the other.
Why has it got to be both?
Because the Last Supper, where this stuff happens to, is telling you what? I'm dying on a cross. And I am the sacrifice in which you will have righteousness. You need the sacrificial element, which is the altar aspect, and you need the table, which is Jesus is inviting us to participate in this sacrifice with him, right? In other words, we all come to the table so that we can participate in the sacrifice that Jesus is going to participate in, right? Now, the altar, as we see it, and this is why we do this, what is right behind our altars? What do we have behind every altar? What is on right behind every altar? It's right there.
Cross.
It's a cross, right? Which is to tell you, we're not just eating here. You're being invited to go here with Jesus when you eat the bread and wine on this table. When you eat this, you go here. Because, and this is really important, the sacrifice isn't just something given for you, to you. It's something that you're invited to participate in, right? That's why in the temple, only the priest goes there and nobody else gets to participate in it. Remember what we said last time? When Jesus dies, what happens?
Curtain is torn.
The curtain is torn, which is to say, y'all can come forward now. You all get to come because you're no longer just watching something happening for you. You're being invited to participate in the thing that is happening for you.
And you're
participate in the resurrection.
Right. Yes.
In some churches, I don't think it's necessarily now, but the altar was against the wall.
Yes, and
Talk about that.
yeah, so we've got an altar up against the wall, right? And we've got one pulled off, right? And what I've often said is, the big difference is this. That if you think about it, when I'm saying the Eucharistic prayer, I'm saying the Eucharistic prayer not to you. I am saying the Eucharistic prayer with you to God, right? Thanking God for what God has done for us in and through Jesus Christ, right? But the problem is, through years and years and years and years of accretions, what happened was, oh, well, let's move the altar up against the wall. Okay, now let's also, let's put a choir in between with a rood screen and you can't see it, and the altar gets pulled further and further and further away from the people, and you wind up having a curtain with a priest behind it, right? Which is exactly what we were trying not to have, right? So what I like to say is, in our chapel, everybody's standing 10 feet from the altar. So it doesn't matter if it's up against the wall or it's not up against the wall. As I say, and when you hear me celebrate a service in the chapel, how loud am I talking? Can you hear everything that I'm saying?
Even when I don't wear my hearing aid.
Right, even when you don't. Because I know that there is a tension. If I could say it correctly, the priest should at one and the same time be both behind the altar and in front of the altar. I should be in both places at one time. What's the problem, Sherry, with me being at two places in one time?
Your split personality.
I can't do it, that's right. I'm
You
human.
should. I mean,
What?
what brings about, why should you be?
Because here's what I would say. On one hand, when the altar's pulled away, what it has is invitation. I'm talking just by the fact that I'm facing you. I'm looking at you. And that's good, except the problem is that some people now think, oh, well, he's saying this to us. No, I'm not saying this to you. I'm saying this to God.
So
Because
that's the ultimate.
that's exactly right. This is exactly right. It's a tension because it's an altar and a table. It's not one of the, it's both.
We have only one mediator, and that's Jesus Christ.
Right.
not you.
That's right. Well, this is exactly right. I'm not the mediator. I'm telling everybody, thank you. I'm not telling you, I'm telling God, thank you for what you have done in and through Jesus Christ. Remember, I said we got 3 jobs here on Sunday morning. Pray for the person next to you, love the person next to you, and have gratitude for what God is doing in and through Jesus Christ for you.
And the audience for Sunday service is supposed to be God, not us.
Well, so this is the thing.
Not audience, just
Whatever the word
yeah,
is.
but here's the thing. There is an audio aspect, but so much of that has meant somebody who's not participating in what's going on. Just the Greek word for obedience is to listen under, right? To listen. So there is a way in which the audience is the people. They need to hear the word of God. They need to hear the story. There's another way in which the audience, and you're absolutely right about this, Ron, is God. We give our thanks and praise to God. I don't give my thanks and praise to Terry Joe. I give my love and I say my prayers for Terry Joe. I give my thanks and praise to God. That's where my gratitude goes, right? And so that's the tension. There needs to be an aspect of the service that is pro nobis, for us. There's another aspect that is pro deus, which is for God, right? That's why I said, I'd like to be on both sides of this table at the same time. That's why you will see me kind of, when I do the service in the chapel, I'm here, but as soon as, right before it, the Sursum Corda, that's when I'm talking to all of you, right? The Lord be with you and also with you. Lift up your hearts, we lift them up to you, right? And then I turn around and say, now we're talking to God, right? So we are trying to do something that's really difficult. We are trying to enact the Last Supper and the death and resurrection all at the same time.
Yeah.
Because I want you to be in all of those places, right? Now, every Sunday we will do that, but there's an interesting thing. Some services we're going to be in one of those places more than another. So, how do we begin the Triduum? Does everybody know what the Triduum is? It's the 3 holy days before Easter. So it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday of Holy Week, right? What is Thursday of Holy Week called? What's the kind of Monday, Thursday? What is that? What is that service about?
A new commandment I gave you.
It's about the Last Supper table. This new commandment I give you, do unto others as you have done to me. All right? Okay, so the first day of the Triduum is about the Last Supper. The second day of the Triduum, Good Friday, is about where? Cross. The third day is about what?
Resurrection.
No. It's about the tomb. And Easter is about resurrection.
Right.
So we've got table, Last Supper, cross and death, tomb, and we have resurrection.
And the stripping of the altar represents.
We're going from the altar to the cross now. What is, in most Episcopal churches, what is an altar made of? Wood. What is the cross made of? Wood. Right.
Wood.
When we take everything off, what we're saying is, okay, we're going to the cross now. All right. But let me just say this. This is great. This is why liturgy is so powerful. I also want you to understand this. When they did the Passover, when the Passover was happening, what did God say to Moses? Okay, I'm going to have you do this thing, and this thing is going to protect you from when the Spirit passes over. But here's the thing. I don't want you to do it once. We're going to institute something you're going to have to do every year. Right? Right. So, the establishment of this great ritual is baked into the beginning of what the ritual was when it was done the first time. Right? In other words, God didn't say, okay, now sometimes God says, now, Abraham, I want you to go over here. When you're done, I want you to go over here. Or Moses, I want you to go over there. Or Moses, I want you to go over there. Sometimes God says it. But sometimes what God says is, now listen up. I don't want you to just do this. I want you to do it again and again and again and again. So that what? You don't forget what I have done for you. Right? So,
But that's the Jewish tradition.
that's the Jew. But
Not the Christian.
that's right. Except, here's the thing. What is all throughout the Gospel of John? It's like every chapter begins with what? Oh, and well, the Passover was coming soon. Oh, and the Passover was coming soon. Right? Well, what's the Passover for us in Christianity?
It's the cross.
It's Jesus' death on the cross. Right. So they're having a table fellowship in the Last Supper, which is now saying, baked into it, what does he say? Do this in remembrance of me. Just like the Passover. Keep doing this.
Right?
I'm not just doing this for you. Keep on doing it. I'm showing you how to do it. And by the way, this is now the new Passover.
And one day it might have meaning to you. But do it.
But do it right, because this is also the important thing. Meaning that only is in our head. Like you read a book, you go, oh, well, that's great, and then Lynn and I read we read Jung's book, and we go, oh, did you hear about that article? Oh, it's great, that's fantastic. We got more information now, more wisdom. But real wisdom is lived out. Real wisdom uses our body. Right? Well, think about this, Lynn. You as a psychologist are trying to help people see the deep patterns in their behavior that are both good and bad, right? They learned all that stuff by doing it again and again and again. How hard is it to have somebody unlearn something they've been doing again and again and again and again?
Very hard.
Very hard, right? Because it's not just, you didn't learn this stuff by reading a book. You learn this stuff by doing it, right? So, I was having a conversation with Ian. He said, "Oh, Robert, I want to do that just like you do. How can I do it?" I said, "Well, do it for 15 years. And then come back and tell me how you're doing it." Right? Like, you have to practice this. You want to get good at something? Practice it. Do it. Don't just read about it. Right? Has anybody ever become a master at the violin by just reading about playing the violin? No.
Practice.
You have to practice the screechy violin for years and years and years until it becomes beautiful.
Until the dog stops howling.
Right. Now this is what's really important. The Passover, Jesus becomes in his death the Passover, but right before that, what's so connected to it is the Last Supper, where he tells us that he wants us to continue doing this. Right? He breaks the bread, i.e., he shows us what's going to happen to him in the breaking of the bread. Right? And then he says, but do not just do this in remembrance of me, i.e., what's about to happen to me, which is really interesting. He tells them to remember what is about to happen. Do this in remembrance of me. Right? Remember my death and resurrection. Because I don't want you just to wind up at the table. I want you with me in the cross.
And it also says, your sins are nailed with me
Right.
on the cross so that you
Right.
can have a relationship with my Father.
Oh, okay, so what do we do right before we say the Eucharistic prayer? What do we do right before? We do two things right before we do the Eucharistic prayer. What do we do? Confession of sin, and then what do we do right after the confession of sin? The peace, right. And do I offer you my peace? No, I don't offer you my peace. I say the peace of the Lord be with you. And what do you say to me and everybody else? And also with you, which is to say, guess what? We recognize we're not totally where we need to be. So we say we're sorry, and then we receive the peace of the Lord so that we're ready to go to the table/altar so that we might receive what it is that we need so that we might be with Jesus, not only in his death, but also in his resurrection. Right? And this is the beautiful thing. It makes sense whether you're 3 years old or you're 90 years old. Right? There's no one who doesn't benefit from doing it. It's not like, well, I turned 21, so I handed in my Eucharist card because now I'm perfect. Right? Like, that doesn't work that way, right? And you know that. We've talked about this before. That's what's so cool about the service. Okay, you heard the story. You heard the story. You recognized how you fall short of what's being asked of you in the story and where your true grace comes from. So you turn again to God, you say you're sorry, everybody hears you because you say, not only have I not loved God with my whole heart, mind, soul, and being, but I haven't loved my neighbor as myself. So I'm being asked by God to be forgiven for falling short of the two things that Jesus asked us to do. Love God with your whole heart, mind, soul, and being, and love your neighbor as yourself. Right? And then we go up to the altar together, realizing that we've all been forgiven by the same grace of God, right? And that even though we've all fallen short, we're still capable of receiving what it is that Jesus has offered, right? This is the thing. you're not receiving this because you're perfect. You're receiving this because God is perfect. Right? Okay.
But he's not weighing my merits, but pardoning my offenses, so there we are.
Right. Your merits are God's grace. That's what your merits are. Your merits are God's love. Your merits are God's forgiveness. Right? Everything else is kind of blah. All right. We have gone over time.
I have one thing to say before everybody leaves. I'm trying to get out of, White Oak, and I have to have somebody to stay with me for a couple of days. They won't let me out if I'm by myself.
Mhm.
And I need to put this out around, if anybody knows anybody that can help me for a couple of days.
Okay.
Or even part of a day, and so it's traded off different things I need. I'm not supposed to be left alone, or they won't let me out of the facility.
Okay. Well, I will, you might want to tell Jonathan about that, okay?
Okay?
All right. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Yeah.
Mhm. You were a good straight. Yeah, turn that off.